The Zephyrian Empire stretched across 17 star systems, each one ruled with an iron claw by Emperor Vexthaner. His crimson scales gleamed like polished rubies under the light of twin suns as he sat upon his obsidian throne, built from the compressed remains of conquered worlds. The throne room itself was a monument to his power, its vaulted ceilings reaching into darkness, while the walls displayed the skulls of every species that had dared challenge his rule. For 3 centuries, Vexthaner had been the undisputed master of this corner of the galaxy. His reputation preceded him wherever his warships traveled. Entire civilizations surrendered at the mere mention of his name. The Crystalline Collective had offered their planet's entire mineral wealth rather than face his wrath. The hive mind of Kepler 442 had dissolved their consciousness into individual components just to avoid his notice. Today was different, though. Today brought news that made even his closest advisors tremble. My Lord Emperor, General Kythera approached the throne with measured steps, her own scales a deep emerald that marked her as nobility within the Zephyrian hierarchy. The scouts have returned from the Outer Rim territories. Vexthaner's golden eyes fixed upon her, pupils narrowing to vertical slits. When he spoke, his voice carried the rumble of distant thunder. Speak. They have discovered a new species, Your Magnificence. Bipedal, relatively primitive technologically. They call themselves humans. She paused, consulting her data pad with clawed fingers. Their homeworld is designated Sol 3, though they refer to it as Earth. A low growl emanated from the Emperor's throat. Another species to add to my collection. Their surrender terms. General Kythera's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of nervousness that she couldn't quite suppress. That is the unusual part, my lord. They have not responded to our standard intimidation protocols. Our advanced scouts reported their behavior as peculiar. Vexthaner arose from his throne, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. Standing nearly 12 feet tall, with wings that could span 30 feet when fully extended, he was an imposing figure that had struck fear into countless hearts. Defined peculiar. When our scouts arrived in their system and began the standard conquest announcement, the humans did not flee. They did not beg for mercy. Instead, Kythera hesitated. Instead what? The Emperor's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. They asked if we were hungry and offered to share their food. Silence filled the throne room. Even the ever-present hum of the palace's energy systems seemed to quiet in anticipation of the Emperor's reaction. Vexthaner's eyes blazed with an inner fire that had literally incinerated species before. They offered us food? Yes, Your Magnificence. Apparently, they had just finished what they called a barbecue and had, in their words, way too much leftover brisket. The Emperor's laugh was like the sound of tectonic plates shifting. Fascinating. They mistake us for common beggars. His amusement quickly transformed into cold fury. Prepare the annihilation fleet. These humans will learn the price of mocking the Zephyrian Empire. My lord, there is more. Kythera's voice was barely above a whisper. The scout who delivered this report, Scout Commander Zeftik, he seemed different when he returned. Different how? He was calmer, more at peace than I have seen him in years of service. And he carried with him a container of something the humans called beer. He claimed it was a gift. Vexthaner's expression darkened further. You are telling me that one of my elite scouts accepted charity from these primitives? It appears so, Your Magnificence. He also mentioned that the humans taught him a game called poker, and that he quite enjoyed it. The Emperor's roar of rage shook the very foundations of the palace. Servants and courtiers fell to their knees as the sound reverberated through the corridors. When the echoes finally died, Vexthaner's voice cut through the silence like a blade. No species has ever shown such disrespect, and lived to tell of it. The humans will burn. Their world will become a cinder floating in the void. Their very atoms will be scattered across the cosmos as a warning to any who would dare treat the Dragon Emperor as a common vagrant. General Kythera bowed deeply. Shall I recall Scout Commander Zeftik for disciplinary action? No. Vexthaner's eyes gleamed with malicious intent. Let him guide us to their world. He will witness firsthand what becomes of those who show mercy to food-sharing primitives. Perhaps watching their incineration will remind him where his loyalties lie. 3 days later, the Annihilation Fleet departed from the Imperial homeworld of Draconia Prime. 57 warships, each one capable of reducing a planet's surface to molten glass, formed a fearsome armada that had never known defeat. At their head flew the Emperor's personal dreadnought, the Crimson Devastation, a vessel 3 miles long and armed with weapons that could crack moons. Scout Commander Zeftik stood on the bridge of the flagship, his usually pristine military bearings somehow more relaxed than before. His scales, typically kept in rigid military formation, seemed to have a more natural pattern to them. Other officers noticed he hummed occasionally, something he had never done in his 2 centuries of service. "Commander," the Emperor's voice cut through his thoughts. "You seem remarkably at ease for someone about to witness the destruction of your newfound friends." Zeftik turned to face his Emperor, and, for the first time in his military career, he didn't immediately avert his gaze. "Your Magnificence, I believe there may be more to these humans than we initially assessed." "Explain." "They are not as primitive as our preliminary scan suggested. Their technology may be less advanced than ours, but their social structures are complex, nuanced. They possess something we have not encountered before." Vexthainer's tail lashed behind him, a sign of growing irritation. "You speak in riddles, Commander. What could these food-offering weaklings possibly possess that would interest the Zephyrian Empire?" "Hope, Your Magnificence." The word hung in the air like a foreign concept. Throughout the bridge, officers stopped their tasks to listen. "Hope." The Emperor's voice dripped with disdain. "Hope is what prey feels before the predator strikes. Hope is delusion. Hope is weakness." "Perhaps," Zeftik said carefully, "but these humans seem to have built an entire civilization upon it. They face dangers daily that would cripple other species, yet they continue to create, to explore, to share what they have with strangers. When our scouts arrived with ships of war, they saw potential friends, not enemies. Then, they are fools, and fools deserve whatever fate befalls them." The fleet traveled for 7 standard days through hyperspace, each day bringing them closer to the Sol system. During this time, Vexthaner found himself thinking more about these humans than he cared to admit. No species had ever responded to the Zephyrian Empire with anything but terror or submission. The idea that these creatures had offered food instead of tribute was an anomaly that gnawed at his consciousness. On the 8th day, they emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The sight that greeted them was not what anyone expected. Where they had anticipated finding a primitive world cowering in fear, they instead discovered a modest fleet of human vessels waiting for them. These ships were small compared to Zephyrian warships, ungainly in design, and clearly not built for conquest. Some appeared to be repurposed cargo vessels, others looked like scientific research ships. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," announced Communications Officer Terrell H. On screen, ordered the Emperor. The main viewer flickered to life, revealing a human face. The creature appeared middle-aged by the standards of most bipedal species, with graying hair and kind eyes behind primitive optical enhancement devices. It wore what appeared to be casual clothing rather than military armor. "Greetings," the human said, its voice carrying an accent that suggested it came from a specific region of its homeworld. "I'm Captain Sarah Chun of the vessel Harmony's Dream. We've been expecting you." Vexthaner leaned forward on his command throne. "You have been expecting us?" "Well, yes," Captain Chun smiled, an expression that seemed genuine rather than diplomatic. "Zeftik told us you'd probably be coming by. He mentioned you might be a bit upset about the whole situation, so we thought we'd come out to meet you properly. You are not afraid?" The Emperor's voice carried a note of genuine confusion. "Oh, we're terrified," Captain Chun laughed, and the sound was surprisingly musical. "Your ships are quite impressive, and we understand you have quite the reputation. But being afraid doesn't mean we can't be hospitable. We brought sandwiches." For perhaps the first time in his 3-century reign, Emperor Vexthaner found himself at a complete loss for words. Behind him, he could hear the subtle intake of breath from his officers as they processed what they had just heard. "Sandwiches," he repeated slowly. "Ham and cheese, mostly, but we've got some turkey and roast beef options too. And Maria's famous potato salad. She's from the agricultural station on Ceres, makes the best potato salad in the solar system. We also brought some coffee. Thought you might need something warm after traveling through space for so long." General Kitharus stepped forward. "Your Magnificence, shall I order the fleet to attack positions?" Vexthaner raised a clawed hand, signaling her to wait. His golden eyes remained fixed on the human captain. "You offer us food, even knowing who I am? What I am capable of? We know." Captain Chin's expression grew more serious, though the kindness never left her eyes. "Zeftik was quite clear about your capabilities. But you know what? Everyone gets hungry. Everyone needs kindness sometimes, even emperors. Especially emperors." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of shipboard systems. Vexthaner found himself studying this human face, searching for signs of deception, fear, or hidden agenda. Instead, He saw something he had not encountered in 3 centuries of conquest. Genuine concern for his well-being. You would feed the destroyer of worlds? We'd feed anyone who was hungry, Captain Chen said simply. That's just who we are. The Emperor's mind raced. This was unprecedented. In all his years of conquest, species had tried to buy him off with treasure, begged for mercy, offered him anything from rare minerals to technological secrets. None had ever simply offered to share a meal. Captain Chen, he said finally, you and your species intrigue me. I came here to reduce your world to ash for the insult of offering charity to my scout. Well, she said, adjusting her optical enhancement devices, if you're set on doing that, I suppose we can't stop you. But wouldn't you rather have a sandwich first? I mean, when's the last time you had a really good meal that someone made just because they wanted to share it with you? Vexthaner considered this question seriously. When was the last time? The royal kitchens prepared his meals because they were commanded to. Conquered species offered him their delicacies because they feared his wrath. But when had anyone ever simply wanted to share food with him? Never. Stand down all weapons, he commanded quietly. My lord. General Kithara's voice was sharp with surprise. I said stand down all weapons. His voice carried the tone of absolute authority. Signal the human fleet that we accept their invitation. As his orders were carried out, Vexthaner found himself wondering what exactly he was getting himself into. 300 years of conquest and domination had not prepared him for potato salad and coffee with creatures who saw him not as a terrifying overlord, but simply as someone who might be hungry. For the first time and longer than he cared to remember, the Dragon Emperor was genuinely curious about something other than the efficiency of his weapon systems. An hour later, the most feared being in 7-star systems found himself sitting in the cargo bay of a human vessel, awkwardly hunched over to fit his massive frame into a space clearly not designed for creatures of his size. Before him sat a simple table laden with what the humans called sandwiches and various side dishes that looked nothing like the elaborate royal feasts he was accustomed to. Captain Chen sat across from him, completely at ease despite being in the presence of a creature that could incinerate her with a thought. Around them, other humans moved about their tasks with casual efficiency, occasionally glancing his way with curiosity rather than terror. So, Captain Chen said, unwrapping something she called a sandwich, Zeftik mentioned you've been emperor for about 300 years. That must be quite a responsibility. Vexthaner carefully picked up one of the offered food items, examining it with scientific curiosity. Responsibility is not a word I typically associate with rulership. Power, dominion, conquest, these are the tools of empire. She nodded thoughtfully, taking a bite of her sandwich. But someone has to make sure everyone's taken care of, right? That's got to be tough, especially across 17-star systems. The Dragon Emperor paused, the sandwich halfway to his mouth. Taken care of? He had never considered his subjects as beings that needed care. They were resources to be managed, territories to be controlled, assets to be protected. But taken care of? He bit into the sandwich, and his eyes widened slightly. The flavors were simple, but somehow satisfying in a way that the complex molecular gastronomy of his royal kitchens never achieved. This is pleasant, he admitted grudgingly. Thanks. It's nothing fancy, just honest food made with ingredients we grew ourselves. Captain Chen smiled. You know, you're different than I expected. In what way? Well, for one thing, you haven't incinerated anyone yet. Zeftik made it sound like that was kind of your thing. Despite himself, Vexthaner felt the corners of his mouth twitch upward. The day is young, Captain Chen. She laughed, a sound that was becoming less foreign to his ears. Fair enough. But, also, you seem lonely. The word hit him like a physical blow. Lonely. Emperors were not lonely. Emperors were solitary by choice, elevated above the masses, dwelling in the rarefied air of absolute power. They were not lonely, were they? Emperors do not experience loneliness, he said. But the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Everyone experiences loneliness, Captain Chen said gently. It's part of being a thinking, feeling being. The bigger the responsibility, the lonelier it gets, I imagine. Vexthaner found himself studying this human more intently. Her insights cut deeper than any weapon his enemies had ever wielded against him. How could this primitive creature see things about himself that he had never acknowledged? Tell me about your world, he said, changing the subject. What drives your species to offer kindness to strangers? Captain Chen settled back in her chair, clearly comfortable with the topic. Well, I suppose it comes from our history. We've had our share of conflicts, believe me. Wars, famines, disasters of every kind. But we learned something along the way, which is that we're stronger together than apart, that sharing what we have makes us all richer, not poorer, that the stranger at your door might become your best friend if you just invite them in for dinner. The Dragon Emperor contemplated this as he continued eating. His empire was built on the principle that strength came from dominance, that resources were finite and must be hoarded, that strangers were threats to be neutralized. Yet here was an entire species that seemed to operate on the opposite principles and had somehow thrived. Your military forces, he said. They are not impressive by galactic standards. How do you defend yourselves? We don't, mostly. The casual admission stunned him. We found that if you treat people well, they generally treat you well in return. We have some defensive capabilities, but mainly we rely on diplomacy, trade, and friendship. That is. Vexthaner paused, searching for the right word. Insane. Maybe. Captain Chen grinned. But it's worked so far. Well, mostly. There was that incident with the Vogons, but we sorted that out over a friendly game of cards. As the meal continued, Vexthaner found himself drawn into conversations about human culture, their art, their music, their seemingly endless capacity for finding joy in simple things. These creatures had faced extinction multiple times throughout their history, yet somehow maintained an optimistic outlook on life that baffled him. More confusing still was how comfortable he felt in their presence. No one bowed when he spoke. No one trembled at his words. They listened to him, asked questions, and treated him like a person rather than a force of nature. When the meal finally ended, Captain Chen stood and extended her hand to him. Thank you for sharing lunch with us, Emperor Vexthaner. I know this probably isn't how you usually spend your time. He looked at the offered hand, understanding that this was some sort of human ritual. Carefully, he extended one massive claw and gently grasped her much smaller hand. Thank you, Captain Chen. This has been educational. As he prepared to return to his flagship, one of the younger humans approached him hesitantly. Excuse me, Your Majesty? Vexthaner looked down at the young male, who appeared to be barely out of adolescence by human standards. I'm Marcus. I work in the engine room on the Harmony's Dream. I just wanted to say, I think it's really cool that you came to have lunch with us instead of, blowing us up. The Dragon Emperor stared at this young creature who had just described his decision not to commit genocide as really cool. The casual way the human spoke to him, as if he were just another being worthy of casual conversation, was more disarming than any weapon he had ever faced. You are not afraid of me, young Marcus? Oh, I'm terrified, Marcus grinned. But my gran always said that being scared doesn't mean you can't be polite. And, besides, anyone who likes ham sandwiches can't be all bad, right? For the second time in one day, Vexthaner found himself without an adequate response. He nodded slowly to the young human and made his way back to his shuttle, his mind reeling from the encounter. As his shuttle docked with the Crimson Devastation, General Kithra was waiting for him, her expression carefully neutral. How did it go, Your Magnificence? Vexthaner paused in the shuttle bay, considering the question. How had it gone? He had intended to gather intelligence on these humans before their destruction. Instead, he had found himself genuinely enjoying their company for the first time in longer than he could remember. Prepare the fleet for departure, he said finally. Shall we begin the planetary bombardment, my lord? Another pause. A longer one this time. No. We return to Draconia Prime. My lord. Kithra's confusion was evident in her voice. These humans require further study before any action is taken. I will not make hasty decisions based on insufficient data. It was a lie, and he suspected his general knew it. But it was the only explanation he could offer that wouldn't undermine his authority. The truth, that he couldn't bring himself to destroy beings who had shown him simple kindness, was too dangerous to admit, even to himself. As the Zephyrian fleet departed the Sol system, Vexthaner stood in his private chambers, staring out at the stars and thinking about sandwiches, lonely emperors, and young humans who thought that sharing a meal could make anyone not all bad. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Dragon Emperor went to sleep without ordering anyone's death. And, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he slept better than he had in years. 3 months had passed since the encounter in the Sol system, and Emperor Vexthaner found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. For 3 centuries, his days had followed a predictable pattern. Morning reports on conquered territories, afternoon sessions dealing with rebellions or resistance movements, evenings planning new conquests. Now he caught himself staring out windows, wondering what the humans were doing. The official report to his council had been simple. The humans required further observation before action could be taken. A reasonable decision from a tactical standpoint. What he didn't mention was that he had ordered his intelligence networks to gather every piece of information available about human culture, and that he read these reports with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt since his early days of conquest. Today's briefing was particularly troubling. "My Lord Emperor," Admiral Crosstow began, his bronze scales catching the light as he consulted his datapad. "Our long-range surveillance of the human homeworld has revealed some concerning developments." Vexthaner leaned forward on his throne. "Define concerning." "It appears the humans have been talking about you, your magnificence." "Naturally, terror of my presence would be expected." "Not exactly, my lord." The Admiral's scales shifted to a slightly more orange hue, indicating nervousness. "They appear to have created what they call memes about your visit." Memes. Cultural information packages, transmitted through their global communication networks. They seem to find humor in the fact that you accepted their lunch invitation. Vexthaner's eyes narrowed. "Show me." The main display screen flickered to life, revealing a series of human communication posts. The first showed a crude drawing of a large dragon-like creature sitting at a small table with tiny human figures, with text that read, "When you're the most feared being in the galaxy, but someone offers you a really good sandwich." The second image showed what appeared to be a photograph of his own flagship with the caption, "Came to conquer Earth, stayed for the potato salad." The Dragon Emperor stared at these images in growing disbelief. "They are mocking me." "It appears so, your magnificence. However, the tone seems more affectionate than disrespectful. They seem to view your visit as endearing rather than threatening." Endearing. The word felt strange in Vexthaner's mouth. The most feared being in 7-star systems is considered endearing. General Kitharus stepped forward. "My lord, perhaps this demonstrates the human's fundamental lack of understanding regarding your true nature. Should we return to complete their pacification?" Before Vexthaner could respond, Communications Officer Terrell H. announced an incoming transmission. "My lord, we're receiving a message from the Sol system." "From their military command?" "No, your magnificence. It appears to be from Captain Sarah Chun." A strange flutter in his chest made Vexthaner pause. "Put her through." Captain Chin's face appeared on the screen, and she was smiling that same genuine smile he remembered from their lunch. "Hello, Emperor Vexthaner. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Captain Chun. He was surprised by how pleased he was to see her. "To what do I owe the honor of this communication?" "Well, we have a bit of a situation here, and I was hoping you might be able to help us out." The request was so unexpected that Vexthaner almost didn't process it correctly. "You are asking the Zephyrian Empire for assistance?" "Not the Empire exactly. You specifically. See, we've got this problem with some raiders who've been hitting our outer colonies. Nothing we can't handle eventually, but people are getting hurt, and we thought maybe someone with your reputation might be able to discourage them more effectively than we can." Vexthaner glanced around his throne room at the shocked faces of his advisors. A primitive species was asking the Dragon Emperor for protection. It was unprecedented. "What makes you believe I would involve myself in local security matters?" "Well," Captain Chin's smile became a bit more mischievous. "I figured anyone who enjoys Maria's potato salad as much as you did might be willing to help keep her safe so she can keep making it." Despite every instinct telling him this was beneath his notice, Vexthaner found himself intrigued. "Tell me about these raiders." "They call themselves the Crimson Talon Consortium. Been hitting shipping lanes and colonial settlements throughout this sector for the past 6 months. They seem to specialize in attacking civilian targets rather than anything military." At the mention of the Crimson Talon Consortium, several of his officers exchanged meaningful glances. These were not mere raiders. They were a well-organized criminal empire that had been growing increasingly bold in their operations. "The Crimson Talon Consortium has been a minor irritant to Imperial shipping for some time," Vexthaner said carefully. "However, the Zephyrian Empire does not typically provide security services to unaffiliated worlds." "I understand," Captain Chin nodded. "But I was thinking this might be mutually beneficial. These raiders have been causing problems for a lot of people, not just us. And from what Zeftik told us, you're not exactly a fan of people who prey on the innocent." Vexthaner felt a moment of confusion. When had he ever expressed concern for innocence? His empire had been built on conquest and domination. Yet somehow, this human had perceived something in him that even he wasn't sure existed. "I will consider your request," he said finally. "That's all we can ask." "Oh, and Emperor, if you do decide to help, you're welcome to stay for dinner afterward. We're having a barbecue." The transmission ended, leaving Vexthaner staring at the blank screen while his advisors waited in stunned silence. "My lord," General Kithara spoke carefully, "surely you're not considering military action on behalf of these primitives? The Crimson Talon Consortium has been disrupting trade in sectors under Imperial protection," he replied, crafting a justification that would satisfy his officers. Their elimination would serve Imperial interests. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't entirely the truth either. The real reason was more complex and more personal than he was prepared to admit. 2 days later, the Imperial task force emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory. 3 destroyers and Vexthaner's personal cruiser, the Stellar Wrath, more than enough firepower to handle a consortium of raiders, but not so overwhelming as to suggest he was taking the matter too seriously. What they found was a pitched battle in progress near the human colony of New Helena. Consortium ships had surrounded a convoy of civilian transports, their smaller but numerous vessels darting in and out like predators harassing wounded prey. "My lord," reported Tactical Officer Ventar, 15 consortium raiders currently engaging 7 human vessels. The humans appear to be attempting to protect the civilian convoy, but they are significantly outgunned. Vexthaner watched the tactical display with growing irritation. The consortium ships were specifically targeting civilian vessels while avoiding direct engagement with the human defenders. It was cowardly, wasteful, and inefficient. "Signal the consortium vessels," he commanded. "Channel open, Your Magnificence. Attention Crimson Talon Consortium vessels. You are operating in territory under the protection of the Zephyrian Empire. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came quickly, transmitted from the consortium flagship. "This is Captain Rixgal of the Crimson Talon. We don't recognize any Imperial claims in this backwater region. These humans have no alliance with your empire." "They do now," Vexthaner replied without thinking. The words had left his mouth before he fully realized their implications. A moment of silence stretched across all channels before Captain Rixgal responded with laughter. "The mighty Dragon Emperor, defender of hairless apes? How the mighty have fallen." The insult to his dignity was bad enough, but the dismissive reference to humans as hairless apes triggered a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. "Target the consortium flagship," he ordered coldly. "Weapons locked, Your Magnificence. Fire." The Stellar Wrath's main cannon spoke once, and the consortium flagship simply ceased to exist. Where a moment before there had been a ship filled with living beings, there was now only expanding debris and energy. "This is Emperor Vexthaner of the Zephyrian Empire," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Any consortium vessel that does not withdraw from this system within the next 60 seconds will share their flagship's fate." The remaining 14 ships didn't wait to test his resolve. Within 30 seconds, they had engaged their FTL drives and vanished into hyperspace. "Incoming transmission from the human convoy," Terrell H. announced. "Put it through." A young human male appeared on screen, his face flushed with adrenaline and gratitude. "This is Commander Jackson of the Transport Escort Determination. Thank you, Emperor Vexthaner. You saved a lot of lives today." "It was merely the elimination of a threat to Imperial interests," Vexthaner replied, but the formal words felt hollow. "Maybe so, but those transports were carrying medical supplies to 3 colonies dealing with a plague outbreak. Your Imperial interests just saved about 50,000 people." The number hit Vexthaner harder than he expected. 50,000 lives. He had saved 50,000 lives by destroying 14 ships. Usually, his military actions resulted in the opposite mathematical equation. "I trust the medical supplies will reach their destinations safely." "They will, thanks to you. Listen, I know Captain Chen invited you to stay for dinner, but I wanted to extend a personal invitation too. My wife makes the best apple pie in the colony, and I think you'd enjoy meeting our kids. They've been talking about you nonstop since word got around about your lunch visit. Children wanting to meet him." Vexthaner tried to process this concept. Throughout his reign, children either fled in terror at his approach or were shielded from his sight entirely. The idea of young beings actually wanting to encounter him was almost incomprehensible. "I will consider it," he said finally. 3 hours later, Emperor Vexthaner found himself in a situation that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. He was sitting in a human family's living room, carefully balancing a plate of apple pie on his massive knee, while 3 small human children stared at him with wide-eyed fascination rather than fear. "Are you really a dragon?" asked the youngest, a female child named Emma, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "I am Zephyrian," he corrected gently. My species is often compared to the dragons of human mythology. Can you really breathe fire? This question came from Tom, slightly older and clearly fascinated by the practical aspects of dragon physiology. I can generate plasma at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius, Vexthaner replied. Then, realized this might not be the most child-friendly way to phrase it. Yes, I can breathe fire. Cool. Emma clapped her hands together. Can you show us? Emma, her mother Alice warned gently, I don't think that's a good idea inside the house. Actually, Vexthaner surprised himself by saying, perhaps a small demonstration in your garden would be appropriate. Minutes later, he stood in the family's backyard while the children and their parents watched from a safe distance. He drew in a breath and released a careful stream of controlled plasma, creating a spectacular but harmless light show that painted the evening sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The children's delighted cheers and applause created a warm feeling in his chest that had nothing to do with plasma generation. That was amazing, Tom shouted. You're like a living fireworks show. Do it again. Emma jumped up and down excitedly. For the next hour, Vexthaner found himself the center of attention for three small humans who showed no fear of him whatsoever. They asked him questions about space travel, about his empire, about whether he had any friends among the stars. That last question stopped him cold. Friends. Did he have friends? He had subjects, servants, subordinates, and allies of convenience. But friends? People who enjoyed his company for its own sake, who cared about his well-being, who wanted to spend time with him simply because they liked him. Looking at these children, at their parents who had welcomed him into their home, at the human crew members who had treated him like an honored guest rather than a terrifying overlord, he realized that for the first time in centuries, he was experiencing something that might actually be friendship. Emperor Vexthaner, Tom said seriously, if you want to come back and visit sometime, we'd really like that. Mom makes great cookies too. The simple, genuine invitation nearly overwhelmed him. I would like that as well, young Tom. Later that evening, as he prepared to return to his ship, Commander Jackson approached him privately. Emperor, I wanted to thank you again for what you did today. But, more than that, I wanted you to know that you're welcome here anytime. Not as a conqueror or even as an ally, but just as someone who's become important to us. I am not certain I understand. You saved those medical transports not because of imperial interests, but because it was the right thing to do. You spent your evening playing with children when you could have been doing anything else in the galaxy. That tells us who you really are, underneath all the imperial protocol. Vexthaner considered this assessment. And who am I, in your opinion? Commander Jackson smiled. Someone who cares more than he admits, even to himself. Someone who's been alone too long and forgot what it feels like to be part of something bigger than conquest. As his shuttle returned him to the stellar Wrath, Vexthaner contemplated Jackson's words. Part of something bigger than conquest. For 3 centuries, conquest had been everything. The source of his power, the foundation of his identity, the driving force of his existence. But today he had used his power to protect rather than conquer, to preserve life rather than take it. And, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt genuinely good about something he had done. My lord, General Kithara approached him as he entered the cruiser's command center. What are your orders regarding the Sol system? Vexthaner looked out at the stars, where somewhere among them, children named Tom and Emma were probably telling their friends about the Dragon Emperor who breathed fire in their garden and shared apple pie at their table. Establish a permanent patrol route through this sector, he said finally. Any raids against civilian targets are to be dealt with swiftly and definitively. Are we claiming the system as an imperial protectorate? The question hung in the air for a long moment. Claiming the humans as subjects would bring them under imperial law, but it would also fundamentally change the relationship he was building with them. They had offered him friendship freely. Turning them into subjects would destroy that. No, he said. This is to be an independent protection arrangement. The humans remain autonomous. Kithara's confusion was evident, but she simply nodded. As you command, your magnificence. As the stellar Wrath departed the Sol system, Vexthaner stood in his private quarters, looking at a small container Captain Chun had given him before he left. Inside were chocolate chip cookies that Emma's mother had baked specially for him, along with a drawing Emma had made showing a large red dragon sitting at a table with stick figure humans. At the bottom of the drawing, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being our friend." Friend. The word no longer felt foreign. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Dragon Emperor had friends. And He was beginning to understand that this might be more valuable than all the conquered worlds in his empire. But friendship, he was about to discover, came with responsibilities he had never considered. And those responsibilities would soon test everything he thought he knew about power, loyalty, and what it truly meant to protect the people you cared about. In the depths of space, other forces were moving. The Crimson Talon Consortium's retreat from human space had not gone unnoticed by larger, more dangerous powers. And the news that the legendary Dragon Emperor had taken primitive humans under his protection was spreading through the galaxy's criminal networks like wildfire. Soon, Vexthaner would learn that making friends also meant making new enemies. And this time, those enemies would force him to choose between the empire he had built and the relationships that were rebuilding him. 6 months after the Crimson Talon incident, Emperor Vexthaner found himself in an unprecedented situation. He was attending his first human birthday party, specifically Emma's 6th birthday, complete with colorful decorations, terrible singing, and cake that was somehow both too sweet and absolutely delicious. The sight of the galaxy's most feared ruler carefully helping a 6-year-old blow out candles had become something of a legend throughout both human space and the Zephyrian Empire. His weekly visits to the Sol system were now anticipated events that had transformed not just his relationship with humanity, but his understanding of himself. Today's visit, however, would be different. My lord, Admiral Crostal's voice crackled through his personal communicator as he sat at Emma's kitchen table, wearing what humans called a party hat that looked absurdly small on his massive head. We have an urgent situation developing. Vexthaner glanced around at the birthday celebration. Emma was showing off her new art supplies to her friends while her parents chatted with other colony families. The scene was peaceful, innocent, and about to be shattered. "Excuse me," he said quietly to Alice, Emma's mother. "I need to take this call." He stepped outside into the garden where he had first demonstrated his fire-breathing abilities, noting with some satisfaction that the scorch marks had become something of a local landmark. "Report, Admiral." "My lord, long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet approaching the Sol system. Initial scans indicate vessels from at least 7 different species, including Korthak battlecruisers, Vrextii dreadnoughts, and what appears to be a Zirian mothership." Vexthaner felt his blood turn cold. Each of those species represented major military powers that had never cooperated before. The fact that they were working together could only mean one thing. How long until they reached the system? 18 hours, Your Magnificence. And the size of this fleet? There was a pause before Crostal responded. Over 300 vessels, my lord. Intelligence suggests this is a coalition formed specifically to eliminate your protection of the human species. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. His friendship with humanity had been seen as weakness by his enemies, and they had united to exploit what they perceived as his greatest vulnerability. By attacking the humans, they would force him to choose between saving his friends and maintaining his empire. Have they made any demands? Yes, Your Magnificence. They're calling for your immediate withdrawal from this sector and the termination of all contact with humanity. If you comply, they will allow the humans to live as slaves to their coalition. Rage built in Vexthaner's chest like a nuclear furnace. The idea of Emma, Tom, Captain Chun, and all the other humans he had come to care about being enslaved was unthinkable. "Admiral, what is the current disposition of the Imperial fleet?" "We have 43 vessels within striking distance of the Sol system, my lord. The rest of the fleet is spread across the Empire, maintaining order in the other sectors." 43 ships against 300. The mathematics were brutally simple. Even with superior Zephyrian technology and his personal combat abilities, victory against such odds would be unlikely at best. "My lord," Crostal continued carefully, "there is another option. If we withdraw now, the coalition will be satisfied with demonstrating their point. Your empire will remain intact, and the humans will survive, albeit under new management." Vexthaner closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the birthday party continuing inside the house. Children's laughter, adults chatting about everyday concerns, the simple sounds of people living peaceful lives. Lives that would be destroyed if he chose to preserve his empire. Lives that would be destroyed if he chose to fight an unwinnable battle. For 3 centuries, every decision had been based on maintaining and expanding his power. Now, for the first time, power was not enough. There was no military solution that would preserve both his empire and his friends. The garden door opened behind him, and Emma came running out, her face bright with excitement. Emperor Vex, Come see what Tommy drew for me. It's a picture of you fighting space pirates. She grabbed his massive claw with both her small hands and tugged, trying to pull him back toward the party. The trust in her eyes, the absolute certainty that he would always protect her and her family, struck him like a physical blow. In a moment, young Emma, he said gently, I have something important I must attend to first. Okay, but hurry. We're going to play pin the tail on the donkey next, and Mom says you can play too if you want. As she ran back inside, Vexthaner made the most difficult decision of his long life. Admiral Crosstow, signal all Imperial forces to converge on the Sol system. Maximum speed. My lord, even with our full force, the odds. I am not asking for an assessment, Admiral. I am giving you a direct order. All available ships to the Sol system, immediately. Yes, your magnificence. May I ask, what are your intentions regarding the Coalition fleet? Vexthaner looked back at the house where his friends were celebrating a little girl's birthday, completely unaware that their extinction was racing toward them through hyperspace. We fight. My lord, if we commit our entire fleet to this action and fail, the Empire will fall. Vexthaner completed the sentence. I am aware of the consequences, Admiral. Execute my orders. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation and painful revelations. Vexthaner found himself explaining the situation to Captain Chun and the other human leaders, watching their faces cycle through disbelief, fear, and, finally, grim determination. So they're coming because of us? Captain Chun said quietly. They were meeting in the human space station orbiting Earth, along with representatives from all the major human colonies. Because of your friendship with us. They are coming because they see kindness as weakness, Vexthaner corrected. They believe that caring about others makes one vulnerable. And does it? Asked Commander Jackson. Make you vulnerable, I mean? Vexthaner considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, he would have answered with an immediate yes. Emotional attachments were liabilities, caring was weakness, friendship was a luxury emperors could not afford. Now, yes, he said finally. It makes me vulnerable in ways I never imagined possible. But it also makes me stronger in ways I never knew existed. What do you mean? For 3 centuries, I fought to maintain my empire because it was mine. Power for its own sake. Conquest because conquest was what I did. He paused, looking out at the blue-green world below them. Now I fight for something more important than power. I fight for the people I love. The word hung in the air. Love. He had said it without thinking, but, as soon as it was spoken, he knew it was true. Somewhere in the months of shared meals and children's laughter and genuine human warmth, the Dragon Emperor had learned to love. We'll fight with you, Captain Chin said firmly. No. Vexthaner's response was immediate and absolute. Human vessels will remain in the inner system, protecting civilians. This is not your battle. With respect, Emperor, she replied. These are our friends too. Tom and Emma, all the children on all our worlds, they're part of this. If you think we're going to hide while you fight alone, you don't know us very well. The Coalition fleet outnumbers my forces 7-1. Adding human ships will not meaningfully change the tactical situation, but it will result in unnecessary casualties among people I care about. Commander Jackson leaned forward. Vexthaner, do you remember what you said when we first met? About hope being what prey feels before the predator strikes. I remember. You were wrong. Hope isn't what prey feels. Hope is what people feel when they choose to stand together against impossible odds because it's the right thing to do. Hope is what makes a handful of outgunned ships willing to fight alongside their friends rather than abandon them. 12 hours later, the Coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a storm front of destruction. 307 vessels representing the combined might of 7 species, all united in their determination to end the Dragon Emperor's protection of humanity. At the system's edge, they found Vexthaner waiting for them. His 43 ships formed a defensive line between the Coalition and the inner system, their weapons charged and shields raised. It was a magnificent display of Zephyrian military power, but, against 7-1 odds, it looked more like a noble gesture than a serious military force. The Coalition's flagship, a massive Korthak dreadnought, opened communications. Emperor Vexthaner. The voice belonged to Admiral Gexmore, a Korthak military leader whose reputation for ruthlessness rivaled his own. You have one final opportunity to withdraw from this system and preserve your empire. Continue to protect these primitives, and we will destroy not only them, but every ship in your fleet. Admiral Gexmore, Vexthaner replied calmly. You have one opportunity to withdraw from this system before I demonstrate why I have been the undisputed master of this region for 3 centuries. Harsh laughter echoed across the communication channel. The mighty Dragon Emperor, reduced to empty threats. Your legendary arrogance cannot overcome simple mathematics, Vexthaner. You are outnumbered 7-1. Actually, a new voice cut into the transmission. He's outnumbered about 6-1. Captain Chin's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. This is the human defense fleet. We're not much, but we figured we'd try to make the math a little more interesting. 18 human vessels moved into position alongside the Zephyrian fleet. They were smaller, less advanced, and utterly outclassed by everything else in the system. But they were there, and they were ready to fight. Captain Sean, Vexthaner said privately over a secure channel. I told you to remain in the inner system. And I told you that you don't know us very well if you think we'd abandon our friends. Besides, her voice carried that familiar hint of humor. Emma made me promise to keep you safe. You wouldn't want me to break a promise to a 6-year-old, would you? Despite the desperate situation, Vexthaner felt his mouth curve into what humans called a smile. No, Captain, that would be unconscionable. The battle began with the terrible beauty of coordinated destruction. The coalition fleet advanced in perfect formation, their superior numbers allowing them to envelop Vexthaner's smaller force, while concentrating devastating firepower. But the Dragon Emperor had not ruled for 3 centuries through superior numbers alone. He was a master tactician, and his fury at threats to his friends gave his strategic mind a crystalline clarity it had never possessed before. All ships, Formation Delta 7, he commanded. Target their command vessels. If we cannot match their numbers, we will remove their coordination. The Zephyrian fleet moved like a sword thrust into the heart of the coalition formation. His ships were faster, more maneuverable, and commanded by officers who had served under him for decades. They struck at the coalition's command structure with surgical precision, while the human vessels provided supporting fire and covered their flanks. Admiral Gexmoor's dreadnought exploded in a brilliant flash as Vexthaner's personal ship, the Crimson Devastation, unleashed its full firepower. But even as one command ship died, others took its place, and the mathematical reality of the situation began to assert itself. One by one, Zephyrian ships fell to overwhelming firepower. The human vessels, despite their courage, were simply too outmatched to survive long against coalition warships. Within an hour, Vexthaner had lost half his fleet, and the humans were down to 6 ships. My lord, Admiral Crossdale's voice crackled over a damaged communication system. We cannot maintain this position much longer. Perhaps if we withdrew to the inner system, no withdrawal, Vexthaner commanded. Every minute we delay them here is another minute for civilians to reach safety. Vexthaner, Captain Chin's voice was strained but determined. We've got evacuation ships getting the children off the outer colonies. Tom and Emma are safe, along with about 50,000 others. Whatever happens next, we got them out. The knowledge that Emma was safe lifted a weight from his chest that he hadn't realized was there. But 50,000 was a fraction of humanity's population, and there were still billions more depending on him. That's when the impossible happened. Long-range sensors detected new ships emerging from hyperspace. Dozens of them, approaching from multiple vectors. For a moment, Vexthaner thought the coalition had brought reinforcements, which would turn a desperate situation into certain annihilation. Then, the new arrivals opened communication channels. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the merchant vessel Harmony's Dream, a familiar voice announced. We're here to help. Captain, Vexthaner replied in confusion. You're aboard the station? No, that's my sister. I'm Sarah Chun from the Trading Consortium. We've been hearing about this Dragon Emperor who protects shipping lanes and shares meals with strangers. Figured it was about time we returned the favor. More voices joined the channel. Ships from a dozen different species, independent traders, merchant vessels, even a few former pirates who had benefited from Vexthaner's protection of civilian shipping. This is Captain Rexhal of the Vrelian trade ship Prophet's Edge. The Dragon Emperor cleared raiders out of the Vega sector last month. We owe him. Commander Trixna here, representing the Altarian Merchant Guild. Time to pay back some favors. The Free Captains Coalition stands with Emperor Vexthaner. No one threatens our trade routes, and gets away with it. Within minutes, nearly 100 additional vessels had joined the battle. They weren't military ships, but they were armed, determined, and grateful. The coalition suddenly found themselves facing not just the Zephyrian Empire and humanity, but a spontaneous alliance of every species that had ever benefited from Vexthaner's protection of civilian shipping. The tide of battle shifted dramatically. The coalition fleet, designed to crush a single enemy, found themselves surrounded by a multi-species force that fought with the desperation of people protecting their protector. "This is impossible," Admiral Gexmoor's replacement snarled over the communication channel. "These are merchants and traders, not warriors." "You're absolutely right," Captain Chen replied cheerfully as her refitted cargo hauler launched a spread of torpedoes at a coalition cruiser. "We're just people who believe in returning kindness with kindness." Apparently, that's more powerful than you expected. The final phase of the battle was swift and decisive. Caught between Vexthaner's tactical brilliance, humanity's stubborn courage, and the grateful fury of dozens of species, the coalition fleet began to crumble. Ships surrendered or fled in increasing numbers as their commanders realized they had underestimated not just the Dragon Emperor's military capabilities, but the depth of loyalty his protection had earned throughout the galaxy. When the last coalition vessel either surrendered or fled into hyperspace, Vexthaner found himself staring at something unprecedented in galactic history, a voluntary alliance of species united by shared respect and mutual protection rather than conquest or threat. "Well," Captain Chen's voice carried exhausted satisfaction, "that was interesting. Everyone okay?" Status reports flooded in from dozens of ships. Casualties had been lighter than expected, though several vessels would need extensive repairs. More importantly, the human colonies were safe, and the coalition's threat had been decisively ended. "Emperor Vexthaner," Captain Rexhal's voice carried formal respect. "On behalf of the independent trading fleets, we want you to know that today changes everything. You didn't just protect humanity. You protected the idea that strength can be used to shelter rather than conquer." Over the following hours, as the various fleets began organizing for departure, representatives from dozens of species approached Vexthaner with a proposal that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. "We want to formalize this alliance," explained Commander Trixna. "Not an empire, not a conquest, but a voluntary confederation for mutual protection and cooperation. Trade routes, shared defense, cultural exchange, everything based on the model you established with humanity." Vexthaner considered this proposal as he stood once again in Emma's garden, watching her show off her new birthday toys to visiting alien children whose parents had fought alongside him. The idea of an empire based on friendship rather than fear was revolutionary. "What would you call this confederation?" he asked. "We were thinking," Captain Chun said with a smile, "the Dragon's Alliance. After all, you taught us that the most powerful force in the galaxy isn't fear or conquest. It's choosing to use your strength to protect the people you care about." 3 months later, Emperor Vexthaner found himself with a new title, First Protector of the Dragon's Alliance. It was a role unlike anything in galactic history, a position of enormous power based entirely on voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. His empire still existed, but it had been transformed. Instead of ruling through fear, he led through example. Instead of conquering new territories, he welcomed new species who chose to join the alliance voluntarily. Instead of hoarding power, he shared it with a council of representatives from every member species. The alliance grew rapidly as word spread of a multi-species confederation where trade was protected, differences were celebrated, and conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. Former enemies became allies, isolated species found community, and the galaxy began to experience something it hadn't known for millennia: widespread peace. On this particular day, Vexthaner was attending another birthday party, Tom's 7th, when he received a priority message from his intelligence services. A new species had been discovered in a distant sector, one that showed promising signs of technological advancement and cultural sophistication. "What are their preliminary characteristics?" he asked Admiral Crosstow. "Highly intelligent, apparently peaceful, and they seem to have a strong tradition of hospitality toward strangers. Initial contact protocols suggest they might be interested in diplomatic relations." Vexthaner smiled, thinking of Captain Chen's first offer of leftover brisket and how it had changed the course of galactic history. "Excellent. Prepare a diplomatic mission, but make sure we bring appropriate gifts." "What kind of gifts, Your Magnificence?" "Food," he replied without hesitation. "Good food, shared with open hearts. I've learned that it's the best way to make friends." As he returned to the birthday party, where human children played alongside young Zephyrians, Vrelians, and a dozen other species, Vexthaner reflected on the strange path that had led him here. He had been the most feared being in the galaxy, ruler of an empire built on conquest and terror. Now he was something far more powerful, a friend to billions, protector of the innocent, and architect of a new kind of galactic civilization based on the simple principle that sharing a meal with a stranger might be the beginning of something beautiful. Emma ran up to him, her face bright with excitement. Emperor Vex, guess what? Mom says next week we're going to visit that new planet where the fish people live, and I get to try their underwater birthday cake. That sounds wonderful, young Emma. I'm sure they'll be delighted to meet you. Will you come with us? Please. Vexthaner looked around at the party, at the children of different species playing together, at the adults sharing stories, and laughter across the barriers that had once divided the galaxy. This was his empire now, not one built on fear, but one built on friendship. Not one maintained by force, but one sustained by the simple recognition that everyone, even dragon emperors, was better when they had someone to share their meals with. I wouldn't miss it for anything, he said. And, as the party continued around him, the former dragon emperor understood that he had found something more valuable than any conquest. A place where he belonged, friends who valued him not for his power but for his heart, and a future built on hope rather than fear. Sometimes the most powerful beings in the galaxy were conquered not by superior force, but by the simple offer of leftover brisket and genuine human kindness. And sometimes that was exactly what the galaxy needed.